invisibility, flight, laser eyes. None of these superpowers compared to the number one superpower for sales reps, which is the ability to read other people's minds. Because when you can read your prospect's mind, you can give them exactly what they're looking for, and that means more closed deals, better commissions, and a bank account even Bruce Wayne would be jealous of. Hi, my name is Will and I make selling simple. Now, today I'm going to show you how to become a sales superhero by learning to read your prospect's mind. In this video, you're going to learn 6 ways to understand exactly what your prospect is thinking. We're going to cover 3 internal tactics for reading prospects, like defining the baseline, asking the right questions, and understanding the real science behind listening to your gut. Then we're going to cover 3 external tactics as well that you need to pay attention to if you're going to get a handle on what your prospect is thinking. And when you learn how to use all 6 of these tactics in tandem, you're going to be able to read even the most tight-lipped of prospects' inner thoughts. But before we get into the specifics, let's talk about verbal language. Because language is an amazing tool for connecting and communicating with others. Of course, we all use it every day. I'm using it right now with you. It lets us share ideas. It allows us to vent any frustrations or pain points that we have. And it allows us to solve mutual problems and make each other happy as well. But words alone have limitations, and context, history, individual experience, and a bunch of other variables can change the meaning from one person and what they're saying to the next. Luckily, according to the research, around 70% of our communication doesn't even rely on words, and equally lucky, our brains are equipped with the ability to read nonverbal communication very, very effectively. We can use nonverbal communication to understand what someone is thinking without them even saying a single word. So, what do you need to do to be able to become a better mind reader? So first off, we've got to cover 3 internal tactics, and the first one of those is to establish a baseline. And this one has its roots deep in the world of science. And this is why when you're creating an experiment in the world of science, let's say you're going to test a new pain pill like we've got on the screen right here. Well, you actually need to run 2 versions of your experiment for the data to be valid. Of course, you're going to give this pain pill to people within the experiment, right? We're going to see if it relieves pain from patients who are in pain. Of course, how else would you tell if the drug had worked or not? But you also have to run what's called a control experiment too. And in your control experiment, this is where every single variable of the experiment is the same, except rather than giving the patients a drug, we're going to give them a placebo instead. It's going to be a sugar pill. It's essentially going to be a nothing pill that we're going to give them. And why the heck do we run a control experiment? Well, it's because you need something to compare these results to see how effective they are. You need to know how much of the effects of the experiment are down to the actual drug itself versus the doctor involved, the fact that they're in an experiment, all of these other experimental conditions. And so the end results are comparing the experiment to the control, and that's where we're going to get our results. And when we pull this back to becoming a mind reader of your prospects, you need to do exactly the same thing. You need to understand the control group. You need to understand the prospect's baseline. Do they always have a sweaty brow, or is it when they're lying to you? Do they always speak very fast, or do they only do it when they're lying and they're bullshitting you, and perhaps they're close to doing a deal with the competition and they've only come to you for pricing, so they're feeling uncomfortable in the conversation that you're having? So how do we go about doing this in the real world? Well, to build a baseline of your prospect, you need to get them relaxed. Start by talking about something friendly and unassuming, maybe a hobby, the weather, whatever cliche small talk you want to do. Then subtly study how they're acting. This is your baseline of the prospect. From there, we're going to look at any changes that happened throughout our conversation, because these changes indicate a shift in their mood. Are they getting angry? Are they speaking faster? Are they changing the way that they communicate with you? Let me give you an example here. Let's say you ask a prospect about a competitor and they change their posture. They start talking faster. Well, that may indicate a real change, and it could suggest to you that they are lying. Perhaps they're already working with the competitor. They're probably going to go with them and they've just come to you for pricing, whatever it is. Yet, on the other hand, if you ask them about a competitor and they maintain their baseline and they stay the same and they casually say, hey, I'm not really interested in the competition, I want to work with you, then probably they're telling the truth. So when we're trying to read the minds of our prospects, first and foremost, we must always establish a baseline for everyone that we speak to. And then we're going to look for changes in the emotion, how fast they're speaking, how they sit in their chair. If we're on Zoom, if we ask them one thing and they lean back and they're chill, and we ask them something else and they lean forward. Again, we're looking for constant changes from our baseline. Next up, we need to start asking assertive questions, because in sales, you need to be very clear and assertive with the questions that you ask the prospect. Let me give you an example, and this will explain why. Let's take our friends here, Sam and Walter, the sales reps. Sam's got a problem with assertiveness, and when he tries to close sales, he'll go something like this. He'll go, well, when would you like to, get started working with us? I mean, if that's what you're choosing to do. And you can see here, it's not a very assertive question. And so what's the problem? Well, there's obviously a lack of confidence. And importantly, Sam is subtly asking two questions here. He's asking, hey, are you choosing to work with us? And when would you like to get started? Now, there's a lot to unpack for the prospect here, and so there's no wonder a question like this leads Sam buyers to give mixed signals back to him. This makes it more difficult to read the responses that they're giving, and maybe they're going to hedge on their promises, and maybe they're going to back out the deal with no idea what they're going to do. Walter, on the other hand, is a pro. He is assertive, and he asks, hey, does it make sense to sign the contracts today? Now, there's only one way to go from here. The prospect is going to say yes, or the prospect is going to say no. This reduces the amount of mind reading that you've got to do to understand what the buyer is thinking, and that makes them really easy to read. So make sure you're taking a page from Walter's book and ask assertive, clear questions to your prospects. And the last internal mind reading tactic is that you've got to listen to your gut. And there's a lot of science around the truth that the gut brings to us when we get these gut feelings. In one study from the journal Nature Scientific Reports, Italian scientists filmed a series of short videos of a hand grasping a bottle and either then pouring it out or drinking from it. The study participants were shown a short 1-second clip of the hand just before it touches the bottle, and then they were asked to guess using their gut feeling whether the whole video that they didn't get to see the end of was the grasper drinking the bottle or pouring it out. And guess what, right? Participants guessed far, far beyond the mere level of chance and got the answers right more often than not. So that shows scientifically that you should trust your gut feelings when you're reading your prospects. And there's countless other studies like this one as well. The point here is that our tuition is more powerful than most people give it credit for. It's a primal response that has been honed over millions and millions of years. It's what kept your ancestors alive, and it's just as effective in the corporate jungle that it has been in the real jungle in the past. So if you feel like a prospect is confused or they're upset or they're excited or disengaged, but you can't quite put your finger on why, well, listen to your gut. And more likely than not, your unconscious mind, your gut is picking up on signals that your consciousness just can't see. And we could never cover and train you in one video like this. So when your gut is telling you something is up, listen to it and make a change in your conversation, re-engage the buyer, ask them what's going on, what's wrong, be assertive about it. Okay, so that's 3 internal tactics. Let's now shift over to external tactics. And the first one is that you've got to study your environment. So when you're trying to read your prospects, be on the lookout for any environmental cues that hint to your prospect's personality, hobby, or motivators. You can use these cues to round out your idea of who your prospect is. Let's say your prospect plays tennis every weekend at a high club level. Well, it's very likely that they're extremely competitive. So bear this in mind when you're reading the mind of your prospect, because this will sway how they make decisions, what they're likely to do, and how you can best communicate with them. You can also use the prospect's environment as a way to build rapport and open the door to even more friendly and open conversations. For instance, when I interviewed Andy White, author of Medic, for the first time, I noticed that he had tons of racing helmets on his bookcase in the background behind him on the Zoom call that we were on. Now, I could have let that environmental cue go, but instead I brought it up. I happen to like motorsport, F1, I've got a GR Yaris, we do track days in, and so we had instant rapport because of it. And the more rapport that we have, the less that your buyer is going to have their guards up, the easier you're going to be able to communicate with them, and the more effectively you're going to be able to read their mind. So be sure to make note of any environmental cues that you see when you're engaging with your prospects, because they could be the difference between closing the deal and crashing it. Next up, take note of your prospect's appearance. What are they wearing? How do they keep themselves? Are they clad in an expensive jewel encrusted watch? Are they wearing a Ferrari Owners Club t-shirt? Are they dressed down and they've got weird sweat-stained pants on? Do they have unkempt hair? Do they just not care about their appearance at all? Now, to be clear, we're not trying to read the prospect via their appearance and see if they just have money. A lot of super rich people wear tattered Ralph Lauren polo shirts after all when they're getting off their super yachts. Instead, we're trying to suss out their social status. Who are they compared to the people that surround them? If, for example, they are more dressed down than everyone else in the room, then they're probably the real decision maker here. So best to focus in on them when you're talking about budgets within your pitch. If they're wearing a Rolex and everyone else looks like a student and they're all wearing Apple Watches and smartwatches, then you should probably approach them differently than you would do everyone else. And then the final external tactic to read people's minds is to be ultra aware of distractions. And this one is going to seem a little bit counterintuitive. But one of your top goals on a sales call is to command your prospects' full attention. And if you don't have it, that means they just don't care about what you're saying. And it makes it very difficult to read their mind if they're completely distracted. This is because if they're distracted and they move away from their baseline, well, you don't know if it was something that you said, that you did, your product's features, benefits, the value to the buyer, or if it was something else that was going on around them in the room or in their brains. And if you find your prospect is massively distracted when you're on a call with them, in a meeting or on a Zoom call, there are 3 things you can do. First off, double down on the point that you just made to bring back the attention of the prospect. Really hit on the reason why your prospect is going to benefit from working with you. Go over it multiple times until essentially you'll see them submit and they'll go, okay, no matter how distracted they are in the room. Next up, and this is a bit more ballsy, just call them out on it. Stop the call where you are and say, hey, are you distracted? Hey, is there something going on? Hey, are you not picking up what I'm putting down? Now, as you might imagine, this one's a little bit risky, especially if you've not built up a lot of rapport with the prospect. But in some cases, that assertiveness is enough to make them realize that maybe you're someone worth listening to and not just a slimy salesperson who's willing to do whatever it takes and whatever's sucking up to get the deal done. If you were a real consultant, if you had real value to add to the marketplace and someone wasn't listening to you, you just go, okay, we're done here. What are we doing? Are you going to pay attention or not? And last, and this is something that I've done many, many times working in medical device sales, because of course we're selling to a surgeon in the operating room 9 times out of 10 as they're performing surgery on a real person, right? If they're not listening, if they can't focus, if they've got other things going on, then just reschedule. Cut the meeting short and agree on a date in the not too distant future so that your time isn't wasted and so that they have an effective meeting so their time isn't wasted either. Sometimes just asking to reschedule is all it takes to get the prospect in the right headspace so that they go from not understanding what you do because they're distracted into a position where you can communicate with them effectively and read them much easier as well. So there we go. Being a mind reader isn't all that hard. All you've got to do is establish a baseline, ask assertive questions, listen to your gut, study the environment, take note of the prospect's appearance, and then be wary of any distractions. And once you learn how to do all of these steps, you're going to be able to read your prospect's mind, whether they are just flicking their wrist, darting their eyes, crossing their arms. You're going to have a good understanding of what that actually means. And when you understand that, you're going to be able to get more deals done. You're going to understand what your prospects want, what they respond to, and how to close them without being weird. So there we go. If you enjoyed this video, why not click the video on the screen right now and continue making selling simple.